Welcome back as we continue our series, Revelation, God's Picture Book. We're up to lesson 17, and we're looking at Revelation chapter 18. And like we do every week, we're going to go through a review of what we've looked at so far, and we'll abbreviate a few things that we've gone through in the past weeks, but it is important for us to go and look back at what we've learned so far, because this is one of those books that kind of builds on itself. As each chapter goes by, it'll go back and dip into things that was mentioned earlier. So it's important for us to do that. So let's just begin with our review. Hopefully, even by the end of this, you'll be able to even just mouth this along and sing along with me as we do this review, and you'll know it really well. So, starting with the review here, we are dividing the book of Revelation into 4 acts, treating it as a play or a movie that we're watching. And so Act 1 is understanding the relationship with Christ, the relationship between the church and Christ. And so Revelations 1 through 3, we have this picture of a glorified Jesus standing among 7 lampstands representing the church. Jesus is in the midst of the church, and he sends out these letters to 7 churches in Asia Minor, and there's letters of encouragement, there's letters of exhortation, sometimes some correction. And so that's the first act, and it is Jesus in the midst of the church, or in the midst of the lampstands there. Act 2, understanding the judgment that's coming from God. So in chapters 4 and 5, you got the big vision of heaven. You have the scroll with 7 seals that can't be opened, and you have the Lamb, who's the only one worthy to break the seals and open it up and read what's in the scroll. Chapter 6, the Lamb breaks 6 out of those 7 seals. You have these messages depicting the reality of what suffering is for Christians. You have the horsemen that are riding, and they are symbolically showing what Christians are dealing with. Chapter 7, there's an interlude, picture of heaven, a break from some disturbing images that were revealed by the first 6 seals. Chapters 8 and 9, you've got the opening of the 7th seal, and it introduces the 7 trumpets. And so these trumpets depict actions from God against the ungodly. And so chapters 8 and 9 can contain the first 6 trumpets. Chapters 10 and 11, there was these series of 7. The first 2 series of 7 have an interlude after the number 6. So number 10, chapters 10 and 11, there's another interlude there. And so you have chapter 10, an angel hands John a small scroll and tells him to eat it. The scroll is sweet to the taste, sour to the stomach, symbolizing the sweet and sour experience of living for Christ. It's sweet in that we have the grace of Christ, but it's sour in that there is suffering involved in following Christ. Chapter 11, you have this image of the holy temple being trampled for 42 months, meaning that it's a temporary persecution. You have this image of 2 witnesses representing the faithful of the church being persecuted, killed, and then coming back to life after 3.5 days. The idea is persecution is real, but it's temporary. That brings us to Act 3, understanding why there is opposition to Christ and his church. So, chapter 12 features a picture of the woman and the dragon, and then you have this background of opposition. And so these are symbols of opposition to Christ and the church. The woman is with child, representing Christ and the church. The dragon's trying to oppose the woman and her child. And then it goes back and you get this origin story of Satan, back before time, rebelling against God and being hurled down to earth. And then you have chapter 13, which features 2 more beasts, the beast of the sea and the beast of the land. And then chapter 14 features pictures of the victory that's experienced by those who overcome and stay faithful. And then there's pictures of the judgment experienced by those who oppose God and his people. And then we hear this phrase in chapter 14, And it's continuing in what we're even looking at in today's chapter 18, this phrase, fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. We begin to see Babylon used as a symbol of all who oppose God, or those that think they have great power and authority, but really they don't. But it seems impressive, but in the end, they are going to be destroyed as well. This brings us to Act 4, understanding God's wrath and God's righteousness. Now you have chapters 15 and 16, the sevenfold wrath of God. God's wrath here is pictured as 7 bowls being poured out by angels on the wicked. And we were reminded that God's wrath is sure, it's terrible, and it's only for the wicked. Now, you'll notice here that the 7 bowls of wrath, once they start, there's no interlude here. It just goes straight through the 7. It doesn't do an interlude there. God's wrath being poured out, it is a terrible and horrible thing. And then chapter 17 that we looked at last week, we see the doomed wicked as Babylon. And so using this imagery of the city of Babylon, of the nation of Babylon, and so with the pouring of the 7th bowl of the wrath of God, we see the complete fall of, quote unquote, the great city or Babylon. And this theme is underscored in chapters 17 and 18. And so Babylon, the term Babylon is sometimes used in Scripture as just a symbol of a seemingly overwhelming power causing harm to the people of God. Because Babylon, the Babylonians were the ones that took Israel into captivity in the Old Testament. So you have this type of a symbol being used here. And so in chapter 17, viewed from God's vantage point, you see God is just in the falling of this Babylon. So Babylon here is described in chapter 17 as the great prostitute, worthy of judgment. This is God's picture book. And so we're seeing these images as word pictures to just have us in mind of what of the message God is trying to get across here. And so the second part here is we see through the prostitute's sham. So you see this woman, she has the appearance of royalty, shiny and glittery, yet the golden cup that's in her hand was filled with abominable things and the filth of her adultery. So you see something that appears shiny, but is really not. She's described as being drunk with the blood of God's holy people. And so this is the image you have in chapter 17. The beast she rides on, if you want to fill in a blank, is a has-been. It's described as once was, but now is not, as opposed to God who was and is to come. So this beast is a has-been where God is eternal. And then the viewer profits from this great vision. So what do we learn from this? So why when we're watching these pictures, why are they comforting or why are they important? Well, it spells out the threat. This attractive but deceitful woman, the prostitute, the 7-headed, 10-horned dragon, and all those who have been involved with the prostitute unite now to show the kind of opposition that Christians face. So this is the picture, but what's the reality? The Lamb of God triumphs over them all. And so those who follow the Lamb share in his victory. So in chapter 17, we see the fall of Babylon, the great city, from God's vantage point. Now we see the fall of Babylon from the perspective of those who benefited from the city, or benefited from the system. So this brings us to Revelation 18, verses 1 through 24. And tonight we have time. We'll just read through the chapter, and then we'll go phrase by phrase, sometimes verse by verse here. So Let's read this together here. If you have Revelation 18, 1 through 24. After this, I saw another angel coming down from heaven. He had great authority, and the earth was illuminated by his splendor. With a mighty voice he shouted, Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. She has become a dwelling for demons and a haunt for every impure spirit, a haunt for every unclean bird, a haunt for every unclean and detestable animal. For all the nations have drunk the maddening wine of her adulteries. The kings of the earth committed adultery with her, and merchants of the earth grew rich from her excessive luxuries. Then I heard another voice from heaven say, Come out of her, my people, so that you will not share in her sins, so that you will not receive any of her plagues. For her sins are piled up to heaven, and God has remembered her crimes. Give back to her as she has given. Pay back double for what she has done. Pour her a double portion from her own cup. Give her as much torment and grief as the glory and luxury she gave herself. In her heart she boasts, I sit enthroned as queen. I am not a widow. I will never mourn. Therefore, in one day, her plagues will overtake her, death, mourning, and famine. She will be consumed by fire, for mighty is the Lord God who judges her. When the kings of the earth who committed adultery with her and shared her luxury see her smoke of her burning, see the smoke of her burning, they will weep and mourn over her, terrified at the torment. They will stand far off and cry, Woe, woe to you, great city, you mighty city of Babylon. In 1 hour your doom has come. The merchants of the earth will weep and mourn over her because no one buys their cargoes anymore. Cargoes of gold, silver, precious stones, and pearls, fine linen, purple silk, scarlet cloth, every sort of citron wood, and articles of every kind made of ivory, costly wood, bronze, iron, and marble, cargoes of cinnamon and spice, of incense, myrrh, frankincense, of wine, olive oil, of fine flour, wheat, cattle, sheep, horses, carriages, and human beings sold as slaves. They will say, The fruit you longed for is gone from you. All your luxury and splendor have vanished, never to be recovered. The merchants who sold these things and gained their wealth from her will stand far off, terrified at her torment. They will weep and mourn and cry out, Woe, woe to you, great city, dressed in fine linen, purple and scarlet, and glittering with gold, precious stone and pearls. In 1 hour, such great wealth has been brought to ruin. Every sea captain and all who travel by ship, the sailors and all who earn their living from the sea will stand far off. When they see the smoke of her burning, they will exclaim, Was there ever a city like this great city? They will throw dust on their heads and with weeping and mourning cry out, Woe, woe to you, great city! Where all who had ships on the sea became rich through her wealth. In 1 hour she has been brought to ruin. Rejoice over her, you heavens. Rejoice, you people of God. Rejoice, apostles and prophets, for God has judged her with the judgment she has imposed on you. Then a mighty angel picked up a boulder the size of a large millstone and threw it into the sea and said, With such violence, the great city of Babylon will be thrown down, never to be found again. The music of the harpists and musicians, pipers and trumpeters will never be heard in you again. No workers of any trade will ever be found in you again. The sound of a millstone will never be heard in you again. The light of a lamp will never shine in you again. The voice of the bridegroom and bride will never be heard again. Your merchants were the world's import people. By your magic spell, all the nations were led astray. In her was found the blood of prophets and of God's holy people, of all who have been slaughtered on the earth. All right, so there's a chapter, isn't it? That's quite a reading, isn't it? Now, I would not call that one of the most uplifting chapters of the Bible, is it? Doomed and destruction and judgment there. So, what do we make of this? And let's just take this out here one by one here. So last week you had from God's vantage point. Okay, God's doing this, it's just and it's righteous. And now we're going to view this from man's, viewed from God's, it should be from man's vantage point, loss for the wicked. Hopefully it says that in your outline. So we're looking at this not from God's vantage point, but from man's vantage point here. So verses 1 through 2, the just first part of verse 2. After this, I saw another angel coming down from heaven. He had great authority, and the earth was illuminated by his splendor. With a mighty voice he shouted. I think you can kind of see from what we've learned so far in the book of Revelation here how to interpret this. All right, so this angel's coming down from heaven. He's down from heaven as opposed to the dragon that came where? Out of the abyss. So they're coming from the places where they belong. And so we can see this is a message from heaven. And then all of the other things here had great authority. The earth was illuminated by its glory. There was a mighty voice. The rules of thumb that we mentioned last week tell us that these things point to a message that's coming from God. This is a message coming from God. And so this brings us to verse 2. With a mighty voice he shouted, Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. She has become a dwelling for demons and a haunt for every impure spirit, a haunt for every unclean bird, and a haunt for every unclean and detestable animal. So we have this fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. So Babylon's glory is now gone. So the attractive appearance of God's glorious messenger is quite contrast with the barren and forsaken place that Babylon has become here. So you see this glorious angel coming down, and then you see this message of judgment. Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. Now, another word here, we have haunt, which is just simply a dwelling place, and it's just become a place where demons dwell, and impure spirits, and unclean bird, it's just the idea of unclean, detestable stuff. It's what Babylon is about now. And so we have these things here simply pointing out the unclean spiritual condition of this once great city. And so you just imagine a city today that just seems shining and seems all impressive if you go to it. Maybe you go to New York City, the city that never sleeps, and all of a sudden it's just decimated. Or Las Vegas, whatever happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. And you see, it's just, I've gone there one time before and took a little tour around there, and you have, you have all of these buildings, but it's all just fake and glitter, and one day it'll be gone. So, verse 3, for all the nations have drunk the maddening wine of her adulteries. The kings of the earth committed adultery with her, and the merchants of the earth grew rich from her excessive luxuries. Kings of the earth, familiar phrase now, right? These are the people that were in opposition to God, describing another phrase, or describing simply the wicked here. Now this is quite an eloquent phrase here. They drank the maddening wine of her adulteries. Wow, what a poetic sounding phrase that is. So many on earth were seduced by Babylon. Has anybody ever been seduced by Vegas? I went out there to, believe it or not, I went to a preacher's conference in Las Vegas one time. I really did. And so, but there was a church conference out there at a large church out there, and it was interesting. We were asking him, what is it like to minister in Vegas? He goes, well, that phrase, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, is actually true, because there's a lot of addiction. There's a lot of, as far as gambling addictions, debts, chemical dependency, those types of things, because there are people that go and they are seduced by some of the things that are there. They are seduced by Babylon in this sense. And so perhaps they were seduced by the power and influence. Perhaps they were seduced with the sensuality. Perhaps they were drawn just simply into rebellion against God. And they have drank the wine, the maddening wine of her adulteries here. So, and then you have this phrase of the merchants of the earth had grown rich with their excessive luxuries there. The city had just become a home to greed and excess. And so you can think of maybe a modern day city today, maybe Dubai. You think of this today, some of these cities that are it's just known for their excess. And so it's a symbol of those who put their trust in earthly things here, is what you've got here. So this brings us to verses 4 and 5. Then I heard another voice from heaven say, "Come out of her, my people, so that you will not share in her sins, so that you will not receive any of her plagues, for her sins are piled up to heaven, and God has remembered her crimes." So there is an admonition to the church, "Come out of her, my people." So it's a plea for the people of God not to compromise with the sins of the great city. And so then you have this interesting phrase, "Her sins are piled up to heaven." You got a big mountain of sins piled up to heaven. This is in contrast to the prayers of the saints reaching up to heaven in Revelation chapter 8. Let me just read this to you. Revelation 8:4. "The smoke of the incense, together with the prayers of God's people, went up before God from the angel's hand." So, what do we make from this? You want to fill in the blank here? Just as the prayers of the saints made their way before God, so do the sins of the wicked. Nothing escapes his view. And so as far as the message here, for the saints, God hears their prayers. For the wicked, God sees their sins, and those that are unrepentant, he remembers their crimes. So, verses 6 through 8 here. So we're going to do some larger chunks as we go through this here. "So give back to her as she has given. Pay her back double for what she has done. Pour her a double portion from her own cup. Give her as much torment and grief as the glory and luxury she gave herself. In her heart she boasts, 'I sit enthroned as queen. I am not a widow. I will never mourn.' Therefore in one day her plagues will overtake her, death, mourning, and famine. She will be consumed by fire, for mighty is the Lord God who judges her." So, a couple phrases here. We'll go out here. First of all, it says, "Pour her a double portion from her own cup." This is sin coming home to roost, however you want to put it there. So this is a parallel to the last chapter. Do you remember in Revelation 17 and 16 where you have the beast and the prostitute? They're working together, and then suddenly the beast turns on the prostitute. Revelation 17:16, I'll read it. "The beast and the 10 horns you saw will hate the prostitute. They will bring her to ruin and leave her naked. They will eat her flesh and burn her with fire." And so this idea, give her a double portion, this doubling is not necessarily a matter of her being hurt twice as much as she hurt others. It's sin doubling back on itself and causing this pain. God's judgment is always proportional and always fair. However much she relished in glory and luxury, she will now, it's going to double back, and she's going to suffer judgment and anguish. So using this symbolism here of Babylon as this woman, this is how it's going to be. So now we have this idea of in one day. In one day, these plagues will come with certainty. Now, some translations even put this as in 1 hour, and you see it, that phrase in 1 hour is used later on here in the chapter here. So you think about this, when there are certain cities you go to and you walk through them and you think, my goodness, this is an indestructible place. I remember right after I graduated from college, I went with a friend, and I had never been to New York City, so I thought I want to go visit New York City. So we went to New York City. You know what one of the places we went to as a tourist? We went to the top of the World Trade Center. And I remember just standing on that and thinking how solid that was and just how amazing that was. And then I was just stunned on September 11th, 2001, watching the television, and I thought, there's no way those buildings could fall down. There's no way that this has got to, that morning everybody was going along their own business, and certainly all of a sudden, both of those buildings, you just watch them tumble to the ground. And if you're applying it here, I'm not saying that that's Babylon falling down, but I'm saying life can change in a moment. We think things are permanent. We think things are forever. And the luxuries that we see and all of these excesses that we see, people put their trust in those things. The truth is, in one day it can all be gone. So it's interesting here to compare the pictures of judgment with the effect that's produced by the wicked upon the people of God in chapter 6. You remember the four horsemen there. You had evil seeming to win. There's the white horse, the trail of death, the pale horse, the mourning of death. That's the red horse, and then there's famine. And then in one day, all of the intimidating power of those who oppose God come to ruin. All of those things turn back on this great city of Babylon there. So in one day, it all falls down. So then this brings us to, we'll call this the threefold lament. Now, as you read through the rest of this here, it might sound a little bit familiar if you remember last year when we went through the 66 books of the Bible, when we went through the book of Lamentations. So the book of Lamentations is a lament. And what is it lamenting? It's lamenting the fall of Jerusalem. And as you read through it, it's a very depressing book because it's a lament. There's some glimmers of hope even in the book of Lamentations in the Old Testament. But what it's doing is in detail describing the destruction of Jerusalem and how horrible it is, and the mournful feeling that the people have because of what they see of the destruction of Jerusalem. Now we have a lament over Babylon, the falling of the great city. And this is symbolizing the great powers that be that are in opposition to God, those that have put their trust in these things here. So the threefold lament. You'll see three groups lament over the fall of the great city: the kings of the earth, the merchants of the earth, and the sea captains. So first of all, you've got the kings of the earth, and that's in verses 9 and 10. When the kings of the earth, who committed adultery with her and shared her luxury, see the smoke of her burning, they will weep and mourn over her. Terrified at her torment, they will stand far off and cry, "Woe, woe to you, great city, you mighty city of Babylon! In 1 hour your doom has come." So you've got the kings of the earth. Well, they committed adultery with her. You might remember, again, that is a theme in the Bible. Those that rebel against God, a lot of times God uses the symbolism of adultery, of, I am a jealous God. You will serve no other God but me. And when people stray, it's like you have committed adultery against God. The kings are described here as sharing in her luxury. So as they shared in the luxury of the great city, so they will share in her judgment. Babylon had made them. Babylon had made their life. Babylon had made their lifestyle. Now it's gone. And they're looking over this city thinking, what do we do now? I put my trust in this. What do we do now? So you have the kings of the earth, and they're lamenting. So this is a lament. You have another group that's lamenting. That's the merchants. That's verses 11 through 17, the first part of verse 17. The merchants of the earth will weep and mourn over her because no one buys their cargoes anymore. And I'm going to read this list again here. Cargoes of gold, silver, precious stone, pearls, fine linen, purple silk, scarlet cloth, every sort of citron wood, and articles of every kind made of ivory, costly wood, bronze, iron, and marble, cargoes of cinnamon and spice, of incense, myrrh, frankincense, wine, olive oil, of fine flour, and wheat, and cattle, and sheep, horses, and carriages, and human beings sold as slaves. They will say, the fruit you longed for is gone from you. All your luxury and splendor have vanished, never to be recovered. The merchants who sold these things and gained their wealth from her will stand far off, terrified at her torment. They will weep and mourn and cry out, woe, woe to you, great city, dressed in fine linen, purple and scarlet, and glittering with gold and precious stones and pearls. In 1 hour such great wealth has been brought to ruin. So this is quite a statement here. You have all of the merchants. Now, picture this. I've traveled to New York City a couple of times before. Quite impressive. All of the different restaurants that you can go to. I mean, you just keep walking and it's never ending. All of the commerce, and you can find some store that just sells one little item, spatulas or whatever, you can just find, and it's all, just imagine all of that. I've been to Chicago as well, and it's the same thing there. You just go and it's just, you just walk, you can just go for hours and find store after store after store. Been down to Memphis, Tennessee, same thing there. Just imagine this city where it's just all of this cargo is coming in, all of this trade. Out in Los Angeles, the same thing. I remember just walking through, we went to this place called Olivera Street, and there was this open market there, and you could go and you could buy anything you could think of. It was all there for you to buy. This list of items here, you can see that in cities all over the world today. Think of Hong Kong, or you can think of New York, LA, all these different places here. And all of a sudden, it's gone. In the end, all the wealth, all the cargo, all they had traded adds up to nothing. A major theme in a lot of some modern music today, like a lot of hip-hop music, is about acquiring ridiculous wealth. If you see a lot of the lyrics, they'll talk about cars, Rolls Royces, Rolex, Mercedes-Benz, a mansion, most expensive, alcohol. There's all these slang languages, slang terms for money. It's all about the Benjamins, which is $100 bills, things like that, as if that is the only goal in life. You just see that, and it's just glorified. Now, before we get too hard on the modern music, go back 50 years. The Beatles had their own take on singing about wealth. This was kind of tongue-in-cheek, but they had that song. Maybe you remember these lyrics. The best things in life are free, but you can keep them for the birds and bees. Now give me money. That's what I want. Money don't get everything, it's true. But what it got, money don't get everything, it's true. What it don't get, I can't use. Now give me money. That's what I want. Those are the lyrics from 50 years ago, However, Jesus gives an eternal perspective. We think about all this cargo. Jesus says in Mark 8:36 and 37, what good is it for someone if he should gain the whole world, for someone to gain the whole world and yet forfeit their soul? Or what can anyone give in exchange for their soul? So I think it's important they would read that whole list of cargo, all of that stuff. In the end, we need to look at all of that stuff. It's just stuff. It all fades away. It's all temporary. And what happens to it? It's the 1 hour kind of stuff. How does it go away? It goes away in 1 hour. All wealth can be gone in just a moment. As I'm teaching this tonight, the stock market has taken a pretty big dive this week. And people talk about how many trillions of dollars was lost in the stock market, or how many billions of dollars a certain company has lost here. And people that put all of their trust in whatever investments there are. The truth is, in 1 hour, the Bible says in 1 hour it could be gone in just a moment here. And then there's one more group that's lamenting, and that's the sea captains. So, as I read this, the sea captain, maybe I should read this like a pirate, but I don't think I will. All right, so every sea captain, verse 17, the second part of verse 17 through verse 19. Every sea captain and all who travel by ship, the sailors and all who earn their living from the sea, will stand far off. When they see the smoke of her burning, they will exclaim, was there ever a city like this great city? They will throw dust on their heads, and with weeping and mourning cry out, woe, woe to you, great city, where all who had ships on the sea became rich through her wealth. In 1 hour she has been brought to ruin. So what do you see being brought to ruin here? The supply chain. We hear that word a lot, that phrase a lot here. Every sea captain, they have profited from Babylon, transporting goods back and forth. You think it's going to be like that forever. All of a sudden what happens? The supply chain's gone. And how quickly did it happen? In 1 hour. Sin is both selfish and nearsighted. Its power is deceitful, and its doom is sure. And so this lament of the sea captains here, the lament of the merchants, the sea captains, and the kings of the earth, they are looking in all that they had put their trust in, it's gone. And how quickly is it gone? 1 hour. It's the 1 hour kind here. So if you want to fill in a blank here, putting one's trust in anything other than the eternal will ultimately lead to destruction and grief. If we're putting our ultimate trust, it doesn't mean that it's wrong to acquire wealth or to save or to be wise with our money, invest, and all of those types of things. But when you put your trust in those things, ultimately you're going to end up lamenting like the kings of the earth, like the merchants, and like the sailors here. So, oddly enough, this brings us to a celebration. All right. So, why would we have a celebration here? Look here at verse 20. Rejoice over her, you heavens. Rejoice, you people of God. Rejoice, apostles and prophets, for God has judged her with the judgment she imposed on you. Notice where the judgment is coming from. It's coming from God. So it says here, rejoice, you people of God. Again, this here serves as an answer to the question found in Revelation chapter 6, verses 9 and 10. So this is the picture of heaven, and I'll just read to you. Revelation 6, 9 and 10. When he opened the fifth seal, I saw under the altar the souls of those who had been slain because of the word of God and the testimony they had maintained. They called out in a loud voice, how long, sovereign Lord, holy and true, until you judge the inhabitants of the earth and avenge our blood? In other words, Lord, how long will it be? When will you make this right? When will you bring justice? The answer is, rejoice over her. You haven't rejoiced, people of God. And then apostles and prophets, all of those are people that were serving Christ and were persecuted because of what was going on in the great city. God is giving his suffering church a strong reassurance that suffering is temporary, judgment is certain, and God is in control. And so then we get down to this. It seems like after every great tragedy, we'll hear this phrase, never again. Never again. So verses 21 through 24, finishing out the chapter. Then a mighty angel picked up a boulder the size of a large millstone and threw it into the sea and said, with such violence the great city of Babylon will be thrown down, never to be found again. The music of the harpists and musicians, pipers and trumpeters will never be heard in you again. No worker of any trade will ever be found in you again. The sound of a millstone will never be heard in you again. The light of a lamp will never shine in you again. The voice of the bridegroom and bride will never be heard in you again. Your merchants, where the world's important people, Your merchants were the world's most important people. By your magic spell, all the nations were led astray. In her was found the blood of the prophets and of God's holy people, of all who have been slaughtered on the earth. You see that answer back to Revelation chapter 6. That's those people under the altar there. So, a couple phrases here, that millstone being thrown into the sea. This is a picture of the judgment, and it echoes back to another statement of Jesus found in Mark 9:42. Let me read this to you. This is a statement of Jesus. If anyone causes one of these little ones, those who believe in me, to stumble, it would be better for them if a large millstone were hung around their neck and they were thrown into the sea. Isn't that interesting? And then here Jesus is speaking again to John, giving this revelation. And then we have these list of never agains. And my spell check would not accept that word agains, but you know what I'm talking about. Never agains here. So you have this list that we just read here. So you have music and entertainment, the harpist and the trumpeters. You have workers of any trades. You know, that sound of a millstone. That's industry. You're not going to hear that again. The light of a lamp. You're not going to see that. Weddings, family events. That's not going to happen again. The merchants, the world's most important people, the VIPs. They ain't no VIP anymore. It's all exposed. It's all laid bare. It's all desolate. Never again is it going to happen there. So all of those things, it's all laid bare. It's all made desolate. Never to come back again. So we'll kind of look at it this way and where we're going with this study here. So if you ever watch Star Wars, the old movie, the very first one that came out back in 1977, I think I was 12 years old at the time, and I went to see that a bunch of times. I was right at that right age where it just captured my imagination. And in Star Wars, if you remember, at the end of the movie, if you've ever seen that, there's that giant thing called the Death Star, which was, you know, the big enemies. They were the bad guys. It was this big round spaceship, the size and shape of a planet, the Death Star. And what happened at the end? The Death Star blew to bits. And so they were all cheering over that. And then afterwards, there was this big celebration, and people were honored, and Luke Skywalker and Chewbacca and all the different characters, you know, showed up, and they had this big celebration here. This right here, the fall of Babylon, is kind of the Star Wars. It's the Bible version of the Star Wars explosion of the Death Star. So it's because that Death Star was intimidating. It just seemed like it could never be destroyed. It was just, you know, the way they built it up in the movies, but yet it was destroyed. So the remaining chapters now, 19 through 22, we're building up to the final climactic scenes in God's picture book, and it's going to be great here. And so we're going to see some more intimidating sights, but we're building up to the final climactic scene. So I hope you've gotten some good out of this. My hope is that overall that you have gotten encouragement from this. That, you know, life isn't fair. One day there'll be justice, and all the suffering we have is temporary.